Hey guys, this is Cade, and welcome back to the channel. This is part two of our Harry Potter discussion. For this part, I am joined by Felicity and Hunter, and we are starting off this part by diving into the fifth movie, Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. So, Hunter and Felicity, when it comes to this movie, I'm not gonna lie, I think that this might be my least favorite entry. Not that it's bad by any means, it's still a good movie. However, from a story perspective, I do think that it's one of the weakest movies in the franchise. That's just me. Where does it sit with the two of you?
I it's funny, I was talking about it the other day with Hunter. I was saying like it feels so depressing. I don't know, it just felt like a very depressing movie. And then actually our friend Katie the other day we were talking to her about the series and she said that the fifth one is her favorite. I was like that
Wow.
she's like everybody hates it, but it's my favorite one. And I was like, well, that's funny. I was like, you should you should be in this conversation.
Yeah.
What do you think, Hunter?
I don't know where exactly on like the ranking it sits for me, but it's like definitely way down there. Like it's definitely not a movie. I don't know. I feel like I just really don't vibe with it. I think there's a lot of really important like plot points that go into it, but I don't think it's that strong. And just content wise, I'm like, I just don't know. It's definitely down there for me. I guess I'll start there.
Yeah, I can understand that. I mean, like it's interesting, but it does feel a little bit like a filler movie. I mean, in every single one of the movies, there's like something that's like takes away from the main plot. It's like a big issue, you know?
Well, I think that from a story perspective, one of the reasons why this is my least favorite is because it feels like the Order doesn't really play that much of a role in the overarching story of the film. And I honestly think that the whole storyline with Harry and Ron and Hermione building Dumbledore's army and training all the students, I think that was a lot more interesting.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think that was like more interesting to see. And like I just feel like the name of them, like of the movies, is like the secret that's being exposed at like in the film. But like we already knew what the Order of the Phoenix was at the beginning of the film. Obviously, like they wouldn't let Harry like a part of it. Maybe that was their reasoning. I don't know why it was like the main focus of the film. Because like obviously like I don't know. I just feel like the result ending was like that prophecy thing. So I feel like it should have been called something to do with the prophecy.
Well, I do want to acknowledge this. This is the only movie in the franchise that is written by a different screenwriter. It was written by Michael Goldberg, while all the other movies in the franchise were written by Steve Kloves. He wrote the first four, he also wrote six, seven, and eight. This was the only movie that was written by a different writer. So when you guys look back at this movie, do you think that it shows that it was written by a different writer, or do you think it still feels similar enough to all the other films?
I feel like that's really interesting. And I'm like, now that you say that, I'm like, I wonder if that's maybe why it didn't like sit as well with me as like a lot of the other ones do. Because even like some of the other movies that like don't like are not like my favorite, I feel like they still are like a part of the franchise. But yeah, something about this movie is just like off. I don't know if it's just because like I don't know. I think like Dumbledore's army, like that whole thing, like I just didn't really enjoy it that much. Like I feel like that probably like wasn't my favorite part of like the movie. Or maybe they did it for too long, but that's an interesting point. Like I didn't realize it was a different screenwriter.
I don't know if it's that different feeling, but now that you say it, it's like obviously if people look at it as like the weakest one, then like maybe it is so different. Now I want to like watch it again with that in mind.
Yeah.
I would definitely say like I definitely feel a shift.
I feel like my other like big issue with maybe like this movie because at the end it's with Sirius like when that happens to him, but maybe just like an overarching thing where I think they kind of missed the mark on the whole franchise is I feel like there's not enough either screen time or like character building between Sirius and Harry, and I feel like we really could have gotten it like more in this movie, but we didn't. And so I feel like I was like a little bit disappointed that we didn't get more of that.
Well, just to be clear to everybody listening, we're not bashing on this movie or anything. We still like the movie as a whole. But I will acknowledge this. This movie did introduce us to, in my opinion, some of the best characters in the franchise. One of them being the character of Bellatrix Lestrange, played by the legendary Helena Bonham Carter, who is, I think, is such a phenomenal actress. She brought so much energy and life to the character of Bellatrix, and I can't really picture anyone else in the role but her. I think that she was such a great character. She was such a great villain. She was such a great presence on screen.
Yeah, no, I love her. I mean, I love her and everything. I think the character that she plays is amazing. she really commits to it. Like you said, couldn't be anybody else. But she's like totally different than like anybody else in the franchise. I feel like I just don't feel like there's anyone like as like wild as she is. But it is unfortunate because like she is like supposed to be a hated character that like every time I do see her, I like roll my eyes. But like she does a good job. Like it's good that I do roll my eyes because I'm like, oh no, like something bad's gonna happen because she's there. But she does a great job, so it's like I gotta commend her for that. She pulls it off.
Well, and speaking of hated characters, in this movie, we get to meet the character of Dolores Umbridge. Now, this is a character who I have a very mixed relationship with. I think that she's played incredibly well. I think her actress is great. I think she's written very well as an antagonistic character. But at the same time, she's one of the reasons why this is my least favorite movie in the franchise. But overall, I think that she is a great character and antagonist. And what I find interesting is I think that J.K. Rowling said that she based Dolores Umbridge off one of her professors or teachers from back in school. I'm kind of curious what that teacher or professor was like.
Yeah, terrible. Just
Yeah, she
terrible.
must have been a big yikes. Because yeah, I definitely like she's one of my most hated characters for sure. I think that's also why the movie isn't that good to me is because I just get so annoyed with everything she does. I'm a very like when I was in school, I was very like I'm not listening. Like when I was in like elementary school, middle school, I was like, mm-mm. And so with her being so on the rules, it's just a big like, ugh, I didn't like her.
I feel like that's like we all really don't like her character, but then I think that like as viewers, like we don't like it because of her, but then as like an actor or like the casting agent, it's like, damn, they did a good job because we all hate her.
Well, and one thing I do really like about this movie, come to think of it, is how this movie gave Neville a lot more depth as a character. I think that this is when he really started to shine most. I think in Goblet of Fire, that's when he started getting more screen time compared to the first three movies. Where in this, I think his character really started to shine. We learn more about what happened with his parents. And this is where he starts to really get more fleshed out as a character, which I appreciate. And I also like seeing him succeed well in all the training with Harry and the other students. So that was definitely an aspect of this movie that I did enjoy.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I like seeing his character flourish. I feel like we didn't really see like too much of it in the next movie, which is just kind of funny, like the consistency. Like I just, why spotlight on him then and then not in further, obviously in other movies he does get more, but like it was just an interesting thing to me. But it was nice to see him because I do like learning more about him. And I feel like it's very interesting because I don't know if it's like said in that movie necessarily or maybe in later movies, him and Harry are like born on the same day or like 2 days apart or a day apart or something. So it's like you would think that he would have had more of a, influence in the whole entire series instead of just like certain parts. Like I get like it's like focus on him, but like if she made it such a big thing in the book, like I just don't get why you wouldn't mention it because the prophecy was like somebody at the end of July. Like so it literally could have been either of them, really.
Well, and one other scene in this movie that I think is a real standout is I wanted to bring up the scene where Harry is possessed by Voldemort at the end of the film, and we are seeing all the best and worst memories of his life when we're flashing back to the previous movies. And I think it's so well done, and I think it's such a great callback to all the best and worst moments of the entire franchise. And it's also very emotional. So yeah, I think that's always been a real standout in this film specifically.
Do agree, and I think that that's slightly why I thought it was a little depressing, just because like it was obviously good to see it, like it was very powerful, you know what I mean? But that's like it's not depressing, it just evokes a lot of emotion, like a lot of sad sort of emotion, just because you know what's to come because we've all seen the movie so far, and then you just like know what he's already been through. So it's just a lot, but it definitely provoked a very powerful, like emotional response from that montage.
All right, well, before we move on to the next movie, I want to go over the hidden detail in this film. And Hunter, I think you might appreciate this hidden detail. In Order of the Phoenix, in the scene where all the students are practicing their Patronus charm, we see that Hermione's Patronus is an otter and Ron's Patronus is a dog. And it turns out the type of dog that it is a Jack Russell Terrier. Jack Russell Terriers are known for chasing down otters and other small animals. So I think that this is probably a foreshadow to Ron and Hermione's eventual relationship.
Oh my god. Don't stop. That's so cute.
That's
So
so
cute.
funny.
I thought you were gonna say it's like a what is Snape's like a deer, like a fawn or like a deer or something like that. I thought you were gonna say some. That's so sweet. I love how they did that.
Oh, I love it. I literally love Ron and Hermione. Like that's like my couple. And the like I just love their just great. So I think that's really cute. Like what a hidden detail. It's so interesting. I wonder if she just knew the whole time like where this was ending up or if
Mm.
she, you know.
All right, well, I think next we should move on to the Half-Blood Prince. And before we move into that, we have another guest joining us here today. Cassidy, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be back.
Oh, good to have you back. So, Half-Blood Prince. Why don't we start with you on this one, Cassidy? Because I wanted to get your opinion on this one. So, I've heard people argue that this is either one of the strongest entries in the franchise or one of the weakest. Is this one of your favorites? Hunter, I know that it stands out for you because of what you mentioned last time. But Cassidy, for you, has this ever been one of the strongest movies in the franchise?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's very dramatic. It definitely has a lot of parts to it where it comes full circle. So I think it really hits hard as far as being like one of the bigger ones in the series.
This is definitely like my favorite movie out of the whole franchise. I feel like I just love learning more about Snape, and I feel like we really get that. And also, I'm just like a sucker for Ron and Hermione. That really gets me. And I just love the character building in this movie. I also think this is like one of the most beautiful, like more beautifully like shot movies. So yeah, just like overall, I just eat this whole movie up.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the whole time when I was watching it, I was just like, it's so like it's different in the sense like when I see Draco's like scenes, they're so gray. Like they're just so like dreary and just a totally different color palette like than the rest of the movie. And it's so very interesting. Like I just notice it a lot more in this film. And it's kind of interesting because it just feels like two different sides of the coin. Like Draco is just going through this dreary like awfulness and like Harry's obviously going through his tough time, but like whenever you see him it's a little brighter. It's still gloomy, but brighter in the sense. And I definitely think it's getting up there for me for films. It might be like in my top 3 at the moment now after having a rewatch.
Well, and one thing about this movie is that it's the first film since Chamber of Secrets to have a returning director with David Yates, who also directed the final 2 films. So one aspect that I think he handled very well as a director in this movie was how he tackled the more mature direction that the franchise went in at this point. That's actually one of the things that the studio was looking for when they appointed him as director in the first place and for the final films. They obviously wanted Harry Potter to feel more grown up at that point. But when you compare it to some of the other directors in the franchise, was there anything about David's vision or approach that you think made it stand out when compared to all the other directors?
I mean, I definitely think they're different. I feel like there is like you can see like when it starts to get darker throughout the series and like more mature. And I would say like the last like 4 are very like consistent with each other. So you can see that it was done by like the same, but it's definitely more mature, but they're still like I don't know, like not overtly mature for certain things. Like they definitely hold back a little bit.
Yeah, I feel like this movie I feel like in like Goblet of Fire and Order of the Phoenix, like, they're like teenagers, it's definitely like more mature, but this one just well, I mean, I guess at like the end of the last one and then in this one because of like Dumbledore, it's all just so much more serious. And yeah, it's definitely just like very heavy. And then especially like this one leading into Deathly Hallows, it's just so heavy. So yeah, you can definitely see like the transition from like, oh, we're just kids or like, teenagers trying to deal with this. And this is like, no, like this is like life or death. Like we're like at war now.
I agree. I think there's like a transition in as far as cinematography that makes it feel a little bit more raw as far as the emotion goes. So there's kind of I don't know if there's like a turn in a certain color theme and cinematography that makes it feel a bit drearier, but whatever was done, the state and the atmosphere is definitely much more of a reality check than it was like mystical, magical, fun teenagers like doing things in their own world. Now that we are in their world as well, it feels like we are connected and tied to the hard things that they're going through.
Yeah, and also when it comes to the Harry Potter franchise, most of the movies, if not all of them, have always had some sort of element of mystery to them. But when it comes to this movie, I really, really like the whole mystery of who the Half-Blood Prince is, and the reveal that it's Snape, who's another great character. Although I do wish that this movie focused a little bit more on the mystery side like it did in the book. I wish that that was explored just a little bit more. I mean, we saw some of it, but there was also the whole storyline with retrieving that memory to Voldemort's downfall. I do understand that you can't fit everything from the book in the movie. I just personally feel like this whole aspect of the story could have been explored a little bit more.
Yeah, I feel like more of the mystery was like, what's Draco doing? Like, what's his goal? And like everything like that. So I feel like they could have focused more on what the actual title of the movie was. But yes, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I guess I can agree with that. Like it definitely is like less about Snape. I mean, he's like sprinkled in there, but yeah, there's just so many other plot points going on that it does kind of get lost.
Yeah, I agree. I think I would have liked to see a little bit more.
Well, and I think one of the reasons why that didn't get focused too much on was because there was something else that got a lot more focus. So this is something that has been debated by fans over the years, that I've seen debated at least. And one thing that people, and myself included, feel that this movie focused a little too much on was the romance side of the story. Because if you look back, we have the romance between Ron and Hermione, which has obviously been a recurring thing throughout the franchise. We also have this whole love triangle between him and her and Lavender. We also have Harry's relationship with Ginny, which is a big part of the movie as well. And there's also the fact that she's dating Dean Thomas. And then we have the whole thing with Romilda Vane, who has a crush on Harry, and she ends up sending that love potion to him, where Ron eventually takes and he becomes obsessed with her. There's the one where McLaggen is into Hermione, and she tries using him to make Ron jealous. Do you guys think that the romance was used a little too excessively in this movie, or are you okay with how much it factored into the story?
I don't know. I feel like the important thing, and I feel like I'm like their mother or something like that when I'm speaking right now, but I feel like the important thing to remember is that like they are still teenagers while they're going through like this terrible crisis. So yeah, I feel like they still need to have like a life, like they're at a school, you know what I mean, with other kids. Like this situation, it will consume their whole life in like a few movies, but like, they can still enjoy their lives. But also, like all the other movies leading up to this, it just like foreshadows like what is going to happen with their characters. And I feel like throughout all the other movies, it's like we're, at least for me, I'm just like, oh my God, let it happen. Let it happen. When is it going to happen? Like, can they please, please? And then it finally happened. So I don't know, like maybe it is a little bit too much in this specific movie, and maybe they could have sprinkled it throughout or made it, not as like in your face. But I think it did have to happen for, like the Deathly Hollow movies, because that's like a huge, Ron, well, we can get into it, but like Ron leaving Hermione and Harry and the Deathly Hollows, like that's just like a huge plot point. And then him coming back. So I feel like these things did have to happen, but maybe I can side with you where it didn't have to be that in your face in that one specific movie. But I think that it still has to happen, maybe just like sprinkled a little bit better.
I mean, as an entertainment standpoint, I'm watching it. Like I'm loving it. I'm kind of eating it up. As as a woman, it's what I want to see because it's just intriguing to watch relationships kind of like they're cliffhangers. Every time you see something that you're like, oh, they're kind of flirting here. And then a little bit further on, you're like, oh. And so it's just interesting to see how the relationship builds and how it progresses throughout. And then, yes, it is a little in your face because they are teenagers, but I don't know. I feel like teenagers are like that. So it's not necessarily bad to have it, but I don't know. I enjoyed it personally.
Yeah, actually, when I was watching it, I was kind of thinking about the romantic element of it in the sense of like, is it too much? Because when the scene when after Ron drinks that like liquid and had been under the love spell, and like he is whispering like Hermione's name and Lavender, and Hermione like get in a fight and everything. It really is cringy when you think about like the fact that they are fighting in front of teachers about this. Like it just looked terrible. Like if the teachers weren't there, I probably wouldn't have disliked it as much as I did.
Yeah.
But I only disliked it because I'm like, come on, like just because they're women liking the same guy doesn't mean that they have to be like that about it. I don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah.
It just felt very like typical, you know, it didn't feel like true to the character. Like I just didn't really, I know Hermione can be like a little, you know, but I don't feel like she would have really acted that way in that moment. But I don't know. I've been like, everybody's been in a jealous point. So like I get like sometimes emotions get flared, but when I saw that scene, I was like, maybe unneeded. But I will say a lot of the romance plot points like do have reasons because like sure we could have left the Romilda stuff out, but like in the end, like she had to have this thing for Harry in order for Ron to eat the chocolates to find out that Slughorn was probably cursed or whatever, you know, because he wanted to give that gift to Dumbledore and obviously there was like poison in it. So that's obviously something that needed to happen. And obviously like hair, like anything to do with the three main people is important. But I would say like I know Ginny always had a crush on Harry, but it felt like the Ginny and Harry stuff came out of nowhere a little bit at the beginning of the movie. But I could see the build of Ron and Hermione coming. So
But aside from that, there is one aspect of the movie that I also do enjoy, and that is I really do like the relationship and dynamic between Harry and Dumbledore in this movie. I really like how they're working together in this movie and how they try to recover the memory to bring down Voldemort. So that was an aspect of the film that I did enjoy. And in terms of a certain scene that I think really stood out, one scene in particular that I thought was great was Dumbledore's farewell at the end of the movie when all the students and the professors gather around. And Hunter, I know your relationship with Dumbledore, but I want to say, I think that that scene where they're all honoring Dumbledore after his death is one of the best scenes in the movie.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very beautiful. And I think obviously it's like very sad what happened to him. And obviously, like, I think that he did a lot of good for like the students in school and XYZ. I just really can't get behind like him using Harry as a puppet his entire life. Like I feel like he put on this facade with Harry and maybe he did care about Harry, you know, maybe like he really did care about him, but just using him as like a pawn and this like whole big game is just it just feels so icky, you know. So I feel like my view on Dumbledore just gets like a little bit tarnished because of that, but I feel like also he did do so much.
he had like good values. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like no matter what, he had good values. Everything was for the greater good. And he never like wanted to truly like I don't think he ever really wanted to like better like make himself higher up in life. Like he knew his worth and he knew what he wanted. But I agree, I definitely think like he used Harry, but it wasn't like for like Voldemort reasons.
I think that you could also argue it's one of those moral like dilemmas, you know, like those things where it's like, well, do you save one person for a million people or do you sacrifice, you know what I mean? It's like, do you sacrifice this one person when you can like save millions of lives? I don't know, but I think it's because like Harry is our main character. You're persuaded a different way.
I just had an interesting thought when Hunter was saying that Dumbledore was kind of playing him like a pawn. I was like, oh, it's so symbolic compared to the first episode where they were quite literally playing the game. And he is kind of the leader of this school. And so it's very interesting to think of what he actually could do, even though morally we want to like him. But if you actually think about it, he was playing Harry like a pawn. And I think just thinking back to that, I'm like, oh my gosh, this was all just one big game for Dumbledore. And so it's just very interesting symbolically to think about. That's what I was thinking about while she was saying that.
Well, and actually, that brings me into the hidden detail that I have for this movie. And Cassidy, I think that this is one that you'll really appreciate. So, this is in the Room of Requirement towards the climax of the movie, where Draco finally lets the Death Eaters into Hogwarts through the Vanishing Cabinet. If you look in the background behind the Vanishing Cabinet, you can see the Queen chess piece from the game in the very first movie. You can see the actual Queen chess piece in the background. It's not a huge detail, but I think it's such a nice callback to the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the scriptwriters were very critical in the way they used symbolism in pictures and images, such as like the chess piece. So I think that's a really good hidden detail that yet again they decided to put in to just tie in all these small little metaphors throughout. So yeah, that is really cool.
All right, well, why don't we move on to the next movie, and that is Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1. So, this is the first movie in the franchise where the main journey of the film takes the characters away from Hogwarts. And for you as fans and audience members, does this feel refreshing in any way for it to take place away from Hogwarts, or is that something that you kind of missed from this movie?
No, yeah, it just feels like this whole movie is just so depressing. So I feel like that's like the word I'd describe for it too. Like it's just like depressing, not, I don't know. It's just interesting also to see them just like not in Hogwarts.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of like grew up with them at Hogwarts, so it is kind of a big transition to not see them there anymore. So I agree, it's like one of the more depressing ones of the series.
And you just know what's coming next.
Mm.
So it's just like gearing up. You're like, I want to go back to the beginning when it was all.
Well, and one element of this movie that I do enjoy is how it handles the dynamic between Harry, Ron, and Hermione. That's always something I enjoy. I really like it in this movie because you see how much they've grown and how much they rely on each other throughout the journey, which is something that I like. So that's an aspect that I definitely enjoyed. And I also enjoy all the callbacks to the earlier films in the franchise. You know, we see the golden snitch that Harry's given at the beginning by the Minister of Magic that he caught in his first Quidditch match at Hogwarts in the first movie, which I also really liked. We also see the Sword of Gryffindor, which we hadn't seen since the second movie, so that's also a great callback. What I like about this is that all these callbacks to the previous movies, specifically the earlier ones, is that they're not just callbacks. They also play a role in the overall story of the Deathly Hallows. You know, the sword is used to destroy Horcruxes, and the snitch is eventually used to conceal the Resurrection Stone, which Harry then uses to call his loved ones. So yeah, I love how it utilizes all those, pieces. It's just, I really, really enjoy that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that their friendship is one of like the biggest themes in all the films, obviously, as Harry is like an orphan and that is like his family. Seeing how they interact with each other and what comes their way and how they mature each movie is good to learn alongside, like because we were kids like growing up with them, the movies coming out, like it was a good like moral value to learn alongside them. And then just I don't know, like seeing how much they ride for each other, like and working out. Then like all the Horcruxes obviously is just so interesting, and a lot of like how does that work, or like what does that all mean, and trying to figure those things out alongside them. It's like it's a very mysterious.
Yeah, I feel like this movie is really interesting because I feel like in some of the other movies, like you have these like the Triwizard Tournament and you have like all these like really big events, but this movie is very just stripped down. And I feel like it's one of the most like raw and vulnerable movies. And it also just feels like rather than like, all these like big things happening, it's like we're character developing, specifically like Ron, Harry, and Hermione. And it also just goes to show like how much the three of them need each other. More specifically, like how Harry and Hermione need each other, because like in this movie at the beginning, like Hermione doesn't have a family anymore. Like she's totally like she's given away her whole family like for Harry, I guess you could say. And Harry doesn't have a family now that like Sirius is gone. So they are each other's family. There's that one scene when Ron leaves and they're in the tent together and they're just dancing. That is my favorite scene, I think, in the whole franchise. Every single time I watch that scene, like whether it's like watching the movie or if I see a clip on TikTok, like I'm sobbing. To me, I have never seen Hermione and Harry as like a couple. To me, they're literally just siblings, and they just, like I said, like I think that like they are each other's family. And I think you have Ron in the mix, like he is also their family, but like he has his own family still too. So, but they don't have anybody, like they really just have each other. And I think that's like what makes me so emotional watching that scene. They're about to go fight this war and their whole world is like crumbling, and it's just the two of them now because Ron is gone.
Yeah, I think that scene is precious. Like it warms my heart, and it wouldn't be as cute if we hadn't seen the build of their relationship throughout the series. And if they were to do that, obviously in the first movie, it wouldn't have been the same compared to this one. So I think that by having this movie be so raw and real, that we really can connect to the isolation the two of them feel and like the connection that they need together. So I think that relationship building in the script is very, very powerful.
Well, and keep in mind, when they got to the fifth movie, Emma Watson wasn't sure if she wanted to do another one. So we could have gotten a totally different actress at that point, which, Hunter, do you think that that scene would have hit as hard if it was a different actress in the role?
No, like not at all. Like that scene is so, I think it's like the buildup of, all of the movies that we've seen before that. But no, I think that that scene is like so tragic and like heartbreak, like it's beautiful, but it's also just like so tragic and sad because we've like grown up with both of them.
Well, I will say this one thing that this movie obviously gets a lot of complaints about is all the camping sections with the characters. Some fans have said that it makes the movie feel like such a slog. Some say it doesn't, which, it's definitely, it takes up a big part of the book as well. But have the camping sections ever been an issue for the three of you?
Guess like yeah, it's like a lot of like traveling. Like, was there not an easier way to do that? Maybe that's it. I don't know. Once again, I feel like in each movie there's something where it's like this is taking away from the main plot, So
I feel like I can agree with that. And I do feel like this is one of like the slower movies, quote unquote. But also, like, that's what they were going through, Like, yeah, maybe they could have made it quicker. And again, I feel like rather than like the glitz and the glam of all like the magic and stuff like that, it's like this is really like stripped down raw. Like, these are like humans. Like, they're, I don't know. To me, like, I can totally understand it, but I don't mind it.
Yeah, I think that it kind of had to be part of the process of what they were going through in order for us to truly feel and understand this dire situation that they were in. So I think if it was as effecty and as crazy edited, then it wouldn't be as real, and it kind of would just glaze over the actual circumstances of what they were going and like feeling throughout.
Well, and the other thing is that this movie ends on a cliffhanger, which is generally the case with most part ones of a two-part film. I understand that this is the first part of one story, but for me, just as an audience member, I'm generally not the biggest fan of cliffhangers because it usually, in my opinion, feels like there isn't too much of a resolution to that movie. And again, I know it's only part one, but I prefer it when they still have some kind of resolution where it feels like there isn't that much of one in this movie. For you as audience members, where do cliffhangers sit with the three of you? And do you think that this one was handled well?
pointless in a movie, in my opinion. I mean, if we compare it to like Breaking Dawn with Twilight, like just make a long movie at that point. Like really, just do that because at the end of Breaking Dawn, like Bella's gonna live. Like you know that that's like the next step of it. So it's like, why don't we just continue it? And then you have to wait like X amount of years for another one. It's like, I don't know. Like I said, I just think it's pointless.
I remember specifically when the last film came out, so many people were like, I'm going to be at the theaters, like I will be there. And so I think it made a point that many people physically showed up because it was something that it was a tradition for them to watch these films, and like they just needed obviously to know the answer. And so it was kind of like, if you're a fan, you're kind of crazy for not going to the theater to see it. And so I think it was kind of smart to have a cliffhanger, to be honest.
I don't know. I feel like I can go both ways on this. Like, I feel like sometimes I do like a cliffhanger, but then other times I don't like it. So I feel like it's just situational for me. But I feel like on this one, like, I didn't mind it.
All right, well, moving on to the last movie in the franchise, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2. So, as the final entry in the franchise, where does this sit with all of you, as both a movie and as the conclusion?
I like this movie a lot. The one thing I would say that I don't like about this movie is for some reason I just don't like the cut to like what 20 years later, 15, 20 years later when they're sending their
19.
kids to 19,
Specifically 19.
specifically 19. Yeah, for some reason I just like I don't know, I just like didn't like that one aspect of it.
Yeah, I thought the jump was like a little jarring because we're like comfortable with the characters in the film now. So it's just like interesting to be like, oh, we already fast forward that quick. So yeah, I thought that was the only part.
Well, I will say this. One thing that I do enjoy about this movie is how different it is than the rest of the franchise, if you really think about it. And here's what I mean. So, J.K. Rowling said that part one of the Deathly Hallows is more of a rogue movie, which I do agree with, especially with the mission that the trio go on. Whereas part two is a war film. And I completely agree with her on that. I think that this is definitely a war movie, a fantasy war film in its own way. And I think that's one thing that makes it stand out among all the other films. The fact that the characters are in the middle of this massive war, which has obviously been going on since part one and earlier, but this is where you really feel like you're in a big war, especially the fact that it takes place at Hogwarts. That I think has always been great. And do you think that the whole showdown between good and evil wizards and witches would have had the impact that it did if it took place someplace different than Hogwarts?
No, it had to happen at Hogwarts.
Yeah, it's totally a different battlefield in their like world. If they were in a field or something like, or a city or something, it just would have been like different. I don't know, not the same effect.
And I absolutely love how we go back to the Chamber of Secrets, the Room of Requirement. It brings us back to so many pieces from the previous movies, which is what I appreciate about it.
It's also interesting because like usually in war it ends with like the person in charge meeting their demise in their like home base. So it's funny that Hogwarts is like Harry's home base because like a school, like you would think that it would be like the Ministry of Magic or something.
Yeah, and I do appreciate how this movie gives a lot of characters their moments to shine, and which was really nice. A real standout character in this movie was definitely Neville. Neville had so much to do in this movie, including killing Voldemort's snake, which was really great to see. And it's nice to see how far Neville has come as a character at this point, especially with how he was presented in the first movies, at least. So, while Harry and Ron and Hermione, while they've all had great arcs throughout the franchise, I think Neville is also a great character who has also had a great arc as well.
Yeah, I feel like everything leading up to this is just like it's so satisfying. I think like that's the word I would use to see him just break out of his shell because in the earlier movies he's like shy and awkward and he's like not the best at doing like magic like everybody else is. And then yeah, he just gets his full like redemption arc in this last movie.
Although one other thing I really do appreciate about this movie and just the whole franchise in general is that it's willing to make sacrifices. We see people like Sirius, Dumbledore, Mad-Eye Moody, and Dobby. They all eventually pass. And in this movie, Snape also dies, along with Professor Lupin, Tonks, and even Fred. And although it's sad to see all these characters die, what I do respect about both the books and the movies is how it approaches war. It isn't exactly treated like a complete victory. When they do defeat Voldemort, yeah, they are victorious, but I think that movies and shows too often portray it as only a glorious, victorious moment. I like how it really acknowledges the tragedy and loss of all these other characters. So, yeah, again, I like how it makes sacrifices and it also acknowledges it.
Yeah, I think it makes us appreciate the characters a little bit more when we realize the depth of their relationship and how they truly do feel about each other. So I think it's important to see the sacrifices and relate to the strength it takes to be in the same world that all this is happening in. And it's definitely not easy to be Harry. So I think they're want to touch upon like, yeah, he is a teenager and yeah, he's going through this and seeing all these deaths. So we have to see their sacrifices and just know how hard it is.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like obviously like it's really sad like the sacrifices, but also it's one of those things where I love that like you see all these characters that we've been seeing like the whole franchise like they're all together. The one thing I'd say is that like these sacrifices it's like it does kind of feel like full circle, like Snape his whole life and everything that he did was like to protect Harry. So that's just like super tragic and full super like circle and like same with Lupin. Like him dying is so sad, but it's nice seeing him, prisoner of Azkaban into this and
Well, and I also really love the climax of the movie, the final battle between Harry and Voldemort. I think that's such a fantastic showdown between the two. And in the book, their fight only took place in the main hall. I'm glad that they expanded that in this movie. I'm glad that they made it so much bigger than that. It felt like more earned, and it really showed how far Harry had come as a wizard. Although there is another great standout in this movie. This has always been, I think, one of the best moments in the entire franchise. This is the moment where Harry sees all of Snape's memories. That's always been one of my favorite moments. I love seeing Snape's childhood, how he met Harry's mom, Lily, how he was secretly watching over Harry this entire time, and when we find out how he was ordered by Dumbledore to kill him to earn Voldemort's trust. Well, and also, fun fact, did you know that Alan Rickman almost left the franchise after the second movie? Because he was tired of getting typecast as villains. So the reason that he stayed is because J.K. Rowling let him know ahead of time what Snape's fate would be, how he was always watching over Harry, and how he was eventually going to turn out to be the good guy. So yeah, I don't think that any of this would have had the impact that it did if he had left.
Oh yeah, like I said with like Hermione, if they had changed her, like what's the point? Like, I don't know, it wouldn't have the same effect. Like I know they changed Dumbledore obviously after like the second movie but I think that it would have lost its luster with that. And yeah, no, it's obviously great reveal because the whole time you're like, "Oh, is he bad? Is he good?" Like you really just don't know for so long. You're constantly questioning it. It is one of the longest mysteries alongside like figuring out how to destroy Voldemort, you know? So I do love that because I don't know, I always had like a soft spot for Snape throughout the whole entire franchise. I just felt for him with like the Lily stuff and then like the bullying and like, you know, it's such a good person, you know, with like some flaws, you know, but like to look after Harry like that, even though like his father was your bully and was with the love of your life. That is such a hard thing to do. And so it's just really commendable. And like when you see that, it's just sad because he's, you know, dying and everything or dead. And so obviously he protected Harry and Harry lives and, you know, everything he did what he needed to do. But it's a very emotional moment for sure. I mean, anytime one of the big characters dies in the franchise, it's very emotional. But like that was definitely a strong one.
Well, and I also want to get into the hidden detail in this movie. So, the hidden detail I wanted to point out is during Snape's death, if you look behind him, you can see a Gryffindor scarf in the background hanging behind him. The Gryffindor house generally means that members are brave. So, although Snape is a Slytherin, the scarf is there symbolizing his bravery in that scene before he dies. So, that's a detail that I really, really love.
Yeah, that's so impactful because yeah, I don't know, like I think kind of going back to like what Fee said, it's like everything he did was for Harry. Like I think that like his whole life is just selfless. Like everything that he does is he's doing all of these things without any sort of like appreciation. And like Harry, you know, I think maybe in some of like the later movies he sort of like starts like appreciating Snape, I guess you could say, but like definitely in the first movies they did not like vibe, and he's still doing all of these things like for Harry even though Harry is like not his biggest fan. So it's just that in itself I think is just so courageous to do without like any thanks.
Yeah, and also the one scene that I wanted to talk about is the scene where Harry uses the resurrection stone to call his loved ones, his parents, also Sirius and Lupin. I love how this scene is really the fulfillment of what Sirius had said to Harry back in the third movie. The ones that love us never really leave us. And in this scene, when he talks to them, Lily says to him that we never left. And I think that this scene really honors that in that way. So that's something that I really appreciate about it.
No, I never really thought about that, but that's sweet like to hear it. I think it's very impactful. I mean that whole scene is very emotional, so that's really cute. That I just wonder if since she said that maybe she knew that Sirius had said it, so like that's why she said it, or if that's something they just always said to each other and it's like just a thing like we never really leave you. My hope is that Severus and James talked it out in the afterlife.
I think that's something like very deep to have as a part of like it's not like necessarily like a childish series, but like it is very like much whimsical and magical, and like to be able to like connect like mortality and life is like pretty special, and like making that something to kind of be like not like malleable, but something that we can like digest like that and have it being so impactful is like very well done script writing, I would say.
Yeah, I think it's just so, I don't know, it's so impactful because also his parents throughout like the entire franchise, like we do see them like helping him. I mean, not like helping him, but mentally helping him like throughout like the whole movie. And I feel like it's just like a nice callback to all that.
All right, well, I think that we've reached the end of this discussion. Hunter, Felicity, and Cassidy, anything that you guys would just like to say about this franchise in general before we wrap?
Love it. It'll always have a special place in my heart. It's always good to rewatch, always fun to just like have on. Everyone always just wants to like watch it. Like when I told my other friends like that I was rewatching this, they were like, we need to do like a marathon all together. Like we want to rewatch them, you know. It's just always good to like have a little moment with it because it's definitely like a personality builder, I mean morals builder since we were kids when it came out, so like it's like our thing, like our age range thing, so
I think it's just really interesting how now we can just like pop it on the television and watch it like within like 10, 12 hours. But we had to wait for these films to come out. And I just remember them as a kid being like, oh my God, I cannot wait to see the next one like in theaters. Like this is like it was such an exciting thing, and it's still such an exciting thing. So I think there's something very special that they did with these films that made it so like magical and fun and whimsical and like real at the same time. So I think it's a very well developed series for like kids, teens, adults, anyone. It's just a really good thing.
Yeah, I love Harry Potter. I feel like Harry Potter, yeah, I feel like not even just being like something that you can just like binge, it's also like such a good, I don't know, deep dive into like filmmaking and just storytelling, and how do you tell character stories throughout like 7 movies, you know, how do you keep that going, or how do you just build a world? The world building in this is just so insane.
All right, guys, I think that's the end of this discussion. Thanks so much for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you later.